Today's podcast is brought to you by Audible. Get a free audiobook download and 30-day free trial at www.audibletrial.com/chalkboard. There's over 180,000 titles to choose from for your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. audibletrial.com/chalkboard. Hey everyone, welcome to the Chalkboard Podcast. We are bringing you conversations from our hometown, Kansas City, Missouri. My name is Eric, and with me as always is my best friend and co-host, Micah. What's up, buddy?
Dude, I'm excited because it's baseball season.
It's time.
This past weekend, I had my fantasy baseball draft. It was only 6.5 hours.
You told me that this past weekend. That's insane.
And it's our 4th or 5th year, and there's multiple keepers, and still, once we get to the minor league draft, no one has pre-selected players, so it takes a long time. But
no one wants to go into fantasy baseball and football talk, but how with that many keepers does it take that long? I'll never understand.
Yeah. But we're recording this episode the week of opening day, and even if you don't like baseball, I feel like opening day, if it's not a holiday, it signals kind of a change in the world.
Spring is here.
Yeah, man. Warmer weather, discounted quick trip drinks are on the way.
Let's go.
Yeah, man.
Get that free zoni.
I feel like buying some sunflower seeds. Tell the people who we talked to this episode, because
this was such an exciting episode. We got to sit down with Rustin Dodd, staff writer for The Athletic.
Yeah, man. Rustin worked for the Kansas City Star for 9 years as the University of Kansas basketball beat writer and the Kansas City Royals beat writer for the last couple of years. And he recently joined The Athletic, where he writes about the Royals.
Yeah, let's dive into it.
All right, we're here with Rustin Dodd. Rustin, thanks for being with us.
Hey, thank you for having me. Long-time listener of the podcast,
Means so much to us.
First-time caller. I want to get one trait or rumor. I don't know what you would call it out of the way, but how long have you been a sports writer?
I guess you could say 9 years. I mean, I graduated from college in 2009, and then I was sort of a sports writer for I guess I was a wannabe sports writer for a year probably after that. But essentially, I started working at the Star in 2010. So basically since then.
Okay. So one thing that I've read a lot of sports writers say is that once you start writing about sports, especially like you did as a beat writer, you kind of either lose your fandom or it changes. So how has the way that you view or interact with sports changed since you started writing about them full time? Because I'm assuming you were a sports fan to start with.
Yeah, well, this is actually kind of funny because I grew up in Overland Park. And so when I was a kid, I loved sports. I was the kid who read the newspaper and looked up all the stats and memorized that stuff. And what's funny is that I probably actually like sports a lot more when I was a kid than I do now, which is funny considering it's my job. But the two teams I actually cared the most about when I was a kid were KU basketball and the Royals. Those were my KU was very good. I really liked them. The Royals were not good, but I love baseball. And so when I started working for the Star in 2010, I covered high school sports for a couple of years. That was kind of my main gig. And then in 2012, I started covering KU basketball for the Star and also football, but you don't really pay attention to that. So I did that for 4 years. And then I started covering the Royals in 2016, although, I covered them before, but I started covering them as the main beat writer, as they say, in 2016, and then did that for 2 years. So it's the two teams that I cared the most about when I was a kid were the two teams I covered for the Star. And it's very true. It's just you don't become emotionally invested, and you just sort of lose the fandom. And it's very cliche, but I don't know exactly what happens. You start to see things from a different perspective. You start to see how much people care about it, which is kind of cool, but also kind of weird sometimes. So KU is in the Final Four, and I did watch the game yesterday. It was on Sunday, but I was happy they won, but it was very much it's when the local teams play, it's I want them to do well because it makes everybody in Kansas City happy. and it's fun to write about a winner, but like personally, it's like whether they win or lose, it's like the job is more or less the same.
Yeah.
And like it sounds very cynical, but it is very true.
I mean that's crazy that like your two favorite teams you wound up.
Yeah, like I don't
them.
really have any. I never really covered the Chiefs for the Star, but I was never like a huge Chiefs fan to begin with. But like I've sort of retained like some, like when they like lost in the playoffs this year, I was just like a little upset, and I was just like, wow, this is kind of weird. Like it's like I'm actually feeling like emotion, like but for the most part, I've like lost like any connection to any like fandom I ever had.
Are you still a sports fan, like in general? Like, do you try to keep up with, headlines in other sports, or like, will you watch an NBA game if it's on?
Yeah, well, it's weird because, and I don't know if this is just. Sometimes I think this might be because of my job, but maybe it's just like because when you become an adult, like you actually have things to worry about, and it's like it's probably like true for everybody, not just sports writers. But like, I love watching sports, but like I very much like in a different way than I used to. Like I like watching it for like the performance and like the storylines. But like the other stuff, like I kind of care less about like the constant debates that are like happening or like all that kind of stuff. And like I love watching the NBA, but I never do. And like sometimes I will like hear something about the NBA and it like feels like I'm in a time machine. Like I'm like, whoa, like Mike D'Antoni coaches the Rockets. like I did not know that. Like what? Like when is he coach the Rockets? Like and then or like I'll look and I'll be like, whoa, the Portland Trailblazers are like the third best team in the Western Conference. Like what? Like it's like you check in and you're like, whoa, like that's totally weird. But
Rasheed
like,
Wallace must be having a career year.
Yeah, like they're just like weird things like that where I'm like, okay, like I guess that's good that I'm not really paying attention to this stuff on like a daily basis, but it's just like I don't know. Sometimes people come up to me and they will like assume that I just like know everything about all sports, and it's just like man, the like the Rockets are they're great, it's like so.
I always liken that to like it always reminds me of a season of a show where you're talking about like, oh my gosh, the Trailblazers are great now. Sports more than ever, as information is so readily available, is just always a continuation. And so it's like even with Michael Jordan owning part of the Hornets and stuff, it's like, oh, this is season 15 of the Michael Jordan story or whatever. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It's just weird. And so if you kind of tune out, it's like, oh, I missed all of these plot points, and all of a sudden everything is different. It's really weird.
It is true. I mean, like I feel like like baseball is especially like this, but like the Royals are like the highest rated television show in Kansas City, even like higher than like network, like sitcoms and stuff, like on a daily basis. And it very much is like, it's a television show. Yeah. It's like on every night. You can like put it on in the background. Like, the characters, like, their personalities for the most part. And it is like very much just like dudes watching reality show, like every night, like sometimes it's like entertaining, sometimes it's not, but like it's there every night. Like you get to know the people, and like, it's just sort of like it very much is. This is maybe why I become less of a fan, whereas like you just sort of see sports for what they are, which is like essentially is like a television show that like produces like millions and billions of dollars for like for a corporation. And like it sounds a little cynical like that way, but it is very much true.
Well, and that's why no one ever wants them on their team fan wise, but that's why like Johnny Manziel, LeVar Ball, like people who are total just like wild cards get so much publicity probably is because there's
just like a new wrinkle in the story. Yeah.
Yeah. So when did you start writing about sports? Because I'm like, you've kind of talked about how your fandom has dwindled with the job, but obviously you started writing about sports because you're a fan of them. So when did you start?
Yeah, I mean, I guess in college. I mean, when I was in high school, I played sports, and I was like still into it. And then I very much like, this is very funny. I mean, I loved like reading the Star when I was a kid, like Jason Whitlock, Joe Posnanski, like those guys. So like I very much, I think like was influenced by those guys and was into it. And then like early 2000s, like Bill Simmons columns, like early like Page 2 where like I don't know if you remember, but like the background was like yellow or something.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So like that, I was in high school at the time, and so that was very cool. And so I think when I went to college, I always like say it like this, like I was like under really no illusion about like what my future career would be. like I didn't actually think I would become a sports writer, but like I just remember thinking like, well, I know like what I don't want to do, which is like, sit behind a desk or like do like that. So I'm like, I guess I'll just like major in journalism. That sounds kind of fun. Like if nothing else, like I think my brother was like in law school at the time. So it's like, this is a very cliche thing for like all journalists to say, but it's like, if it doesn't work out, I'll just go to law school, like, so I think that was like my backup plan. And I basically went to journalism school and I started working at the student newspaper at KU. And I like really, really enjoyed it, like even more probably than I imagined I would. And so, yeah, once I graduated and I had some internships, I just was like, well, like, I guess I have like a few years where it doesn't really matter if I'm not making any money or doing whatever. So I was like, I'll just like kind of try this for as long as I can, and then like probably likely find something else to do. And then so far, like it's worked out to a degree, but yeah, it's like always very like not just sports writing, but like journalism in general is like I would not recommend anybody get into it. It's like even if you like love it and like you love writing and like love the noble, like I'm gonna go save the world by being a journalist, like yeah, I don't think you should not get into it.
Apply to law school.
Yeah.
Do you remember? So you went to KU, right?
Yeah.
Or like what were some of the storylines, or were there any like stories or highlights that you remember from those years that stand out to you?
Well, I mean, okay, so like my first semester of like at the student newspaper, I covered the women's tennis team, and I didn't really know what I was doing, but I just think it's funny that like I was like covering all these girls. They were all from like Russia, basically,
Yeah.
like the. And so like that was like my first gig, but then like I actually so I covered the KU national championship season. I was like a junior in college at KU 10 years ago when they won it. And so like I just remember 10 years ago, like one of my best friends to this day, we were like the two basketball writers for the Daily Kansan when they won the tournament. And I just remember like after they won, we were in San Antonio, like we went down to the Riverwalk. There were all these fans like celebrating. And I just remember being like, man, like this is great timing, like just like like I just happened to be the person in school covering the team when they like won the championship for the first time in like 20 years. I'm like, man, like I'm never really going to have like a better like season than this, like even if I'm like in journalism for like, forever. So it was kind of funny, but yeah, like I don't know. I go back and like read some of those stories sometimes and like, they're all just very bad. And like, nobody really knows what they're doing. And like, you're kind of just like mimicking like people you've read before. And like, nobody quite knows what they're doing. So, I don't even remember any, like, I remember a few specific stories, but none of them are probably worth talking about.
Was the ticket scandal during then?
So I feel like that was no, I think it was a few years later.
Okay.
It was like 10, 11, maybe like, yeah, 2010, 2011, like right around then. Because I remember I was out of school when that happened.
Yeah. So talking a little bit about being a beat writer, like you followed the KU basketball team and then you were the beat reporter for the Royals. Like I mean, you talk about journalism being hard, but being a beat writer seems like especially hard or challenging. Like what was that role like for you? Why did you get into that?
Yeah, I mean, it's just sort of like the natural progression for like young reporters to do that. I mean, like it's difficult from like a time standpoint. It's like very demanding and like the schedule is like difficult. But like what's more difficult about it is that like when you were like younger, you're very focused on like, oh, I'm just gonna be like this great wordsmith and I'm gonna like write all these like great stories and I'm gonna be like the next like, Ernest Hemingway of the sports page or something. But you like learn very quickly that like it's very much like anything. It's about like building relationships and like getting to know people. And some of those skills, especially when you're younger, are like a little bit more difficult. And like during the Royals season, like I'm around like the Royals players and like Ned Yost, the manager, like more than I'm around like anybody else in life. It's like very weird. And it's like, and also like it's a very professional environment and like they're accommodating and all that, but like you also are like an interloper. Like you're just like in there. They don't really want you in there. Like some of them are nicer than others, but like it's weird. Like I sometimes use this analogy, like, imagine if like it was your job to like go to a law firm every day, except you didn't actually work at the law firm. You were just a reporter who like went up to every attorney in the law firm and said, "Hey, can I talk to you about your day?" And then like, and then they were like, "Okay." And then you'd be like, "So how's that case going?" And then they're like, "Saw that like closing argument you made today. Didn't seem like it went so well." You know, like,
Yeah.
like if you did that, and it's like, I bet some of those attorneys would be like, "Yeah, like let's talk. This is fun." You know, like I like talking about my job. Like, I bet a lot of them would be like, "What the hell, man?" Like, you know, like you're like, what do you know about being an attorney? You know, like, so like it's very much like you're in their place of business and you're asking them about their job like every single day. And some of them are like they understand it. It's entertainment. This is like the part of the deal. And some are just like not into it, you know. And some people are like very nice, pleasant people in general, but like they don't like to talk, you know. So there's just like it runs the full gamut. And so when you're around people like day to day like that, it does become like challenging and like fun, but like just it's kind of a strange dynamic.
Especially when what's usually most interesting for what you want to write about is things going wrong.
Yeah, or just like, you know, controversy or things like, yeah, players playing poorly or, you know, like any source of like discontent. Like, not that, you know, reporters are always just like focused on the negative, but that like nothing. When I used to see my metrics when I worked at the Star on like what stories people clicked on the most, and it was like if I wrote like a good story, then, you know, it would get a lot of clicks. If it was like it was newsy, like a player signed or like got suspended or whatever, like something unexpected, then it would get a lot of clicks. And then if there was a brawl, like it would get a ton of clicks. So it's like
Naturally.
yeah, like whenever there was a brawl or like, and then like some player had some like spicy quote, you know, like those were like, that would get a ton of clicks too. So it was like brawls, news, and like good stories.
What was it like in 2015 when the Royals just kept clearing the bench?
Yeah, they
all
were
the
like early
time.
2015. They
Yeah.
had like a 3-week stretch with like 3 or 4 brawls.
It was on ESPN all the time.
Yeah,
Everybody
they were
in
like
town
they
was
were the
talking
bad
about
boys.
it. Yeah.
Bad boys of baseball, straight out of Kaufman.
Which is hilarious because we grew up with like Gil Mesh.
Yeah,
It was never
Oh,
fight.
that's incredible.
So, kind of talking about the interaction with players, it kind of seems obvious that you've grown into sports journalism with like digital media, and like I'm a very active Twitter user, and so I'm always interested in like how Twitter has refigured, or for you, just how that plays a role in your job and how you interact with fans and readers.
yeah. I mean, it's weird because when Twitter started in like 2008, I think, and I think it became like sort of a thing in like summer of 2009. I just saying that because that's when I joined Twitter. So that's when it became a thing. Yeah, but
So it became legit.
But yeah, like it somehow it became like the dominant source for like for news organizations. And this is like a bigger discussion than just like my own Twitter like account, but like I almost think that like maybe it would have happened like this anyways, but I feel like news organizations almost made a mistake by like they just like kind of gave over like themselves to Twitter, and like so like it's the thing that we all go to when there's like live breaking news. Yet like it doesn't really. It's funny because it doesn't actually benefit like news organizations all that much. I mean, like there is like a public record of like who broke a story, so it does offer. You know, and like for individual reporters that can like build a brand and like there is like some benefits, but it's like sneak like peek behind the curtain. Like Twitter actually does not really drive traffic, at least not on like a mass scale. Like it just like compared to Facebook and like Google search, like it just people do not really find stories by Twitter, or they don't really click. So that's just like sort of a inside baseball thing about journalism. But yeah, like. So I spend like way too much time on Twitter for like probably the benefits that I actually get, but it's just sort of like the currency of when you're covering a thing with lots of updates and news. That's like a way people can follow along like constantly, and I kind of have a love-hate relationship with it because I do like enjoy parts of it, but like you know, if something happens, I'm like just reaching for my phone, like news, like, oh, I better tweet this. And it's like, all right, like how many people are actually going to see this? You know, it's like I act like this is like the biggest deal in the world. It's like literally like 500 people are going to like scroll this thing and probably see it like within the next like, you know, few seconds. And it's like, we really care that much about 500 people? I don't know. Sorry, this is like I'm venting about my job.
What's the meanest thing someone said to you on Twitter, or can you say?
I don't know. Like I wish I could pull up my phone and find it, but somebody like they mostly it's just like you're like a terrible writer, like you're a huge hack, you know, like stuff like that.
Were you fine with that just to start with? Or did you have to like develop a thicker skin?
Oh, I mean, yeah, you don't like really like to read it. But like sometimes you can like kind of compartmentalize it. But sometimes like their complaint is like, it's not so much that like they're like complaining and like ripping you or saying like you're terrible at your job and like you should quit or something. It's more like, man, no, you're wrong. You know, it's like, it's like, no, like let me explain. Yeah. No, it's like, and then usually like, and then you're just like, oh, why am I getting into this like argument with this like a random person on Twitter? So, yeah.
Do you engage much on Twitter with people like back and forth?
Like sometimes. I try not to do like a ton because you could just get like wrapped up into it, doing it all the time. And I always like sometimes this is like a very stupid complaint, but like sometimes people will be like, you know, they'll ask me like a very like Googleable question. Mm-hmm. And it's like, you know, I'm not like, I do cover this team, but it's not like I'm not Google, you know, it's like, I'm not like an almanac just to like serve you. It's like, imagine if like, you know, 300 or 400 people all like tweeted like, hey, who's starting at first base tonight? It's like, you know, like, sorry, man, like I can't let you know that. Like, you got to draw the line somewhere.
I did notice that The Athletic, who you're writing for now, like they do have comments enabled, which I can't remember if the Star had comments on their articles or not.
They do, but they're less. I think they're like synced up with like Facebook accounts now, so like there's not nearly any of them.
Because people don't want to troll when they're.
They don't want accountability for their trolls.
Like, is that something that as a writer you like? Is that, you know, because while people can be jerks, like people I think generally like want to engage or like ask questions or comment. Like, is that something that you like look for or like, or do you just want to kind of write the next thing?
Yeah, I mean, I people always say like don't read the comments, and I think that's a general like good rule of thumb. I think The Athletic is slightly a little bit different, especially right now, and we can like maybe sort of chat about it. But with like the model of it being like hard paywall subscription only, you do feel a little bit of an accountability to the customers because they're obviously invested in this thing. And so you want to provide like the best product possible. And if that means engaging with them like in the comment section or, you know, email or wherever, like you do feel like, you know, like there is a lot of that. And like, you know, it was very like a lot of times I would get emails from like Star subscribers. And I generally, if they were like a Star subscriber, it's like you try to be as nice as possible. And like, but it's like you don't really know, you know, it's like this email could be coming in from anybody. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I feel like I'm like venting about my job, but I feel like, yeah, if somebody's like invested in reading, like even if they're not even paying for it, if they're taking the time to like read something you wrote, you kind of feel like it's your obligation to like interact with them or engage or however you want to put it.
Yeah.
Hey everyone, we have some very exciting news for you. Micah, how pumped are you about this?
I'm as pumped as Ned Yost when he got to season 2 of The West Wing.
That joke gets better every time because we recorded this 3 or 4 times. But look, here's the important part. We started a Patreon to allow our listeners to help us bring better conversations from Kansas City. We want to continue to bring listeners something they look forward to each and every episode. We're working hard at making the podcast better each week by booking more guests, covering more events around town, and upping our production quality. So if you want to get on board with us and you're into this, go to patreon.com/chalkboardpodcast to learn more and pledge.
For Chalkboard Podcast listeners, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a free 30-day trial to give you the opportunity to check out what they do. maybe you check out The Only Rule Is It Has to Work, our wild experiment building a new kind of baseball team, which is by Ben Lindbergh and Sam Miller. It's about two baseball analysts. Ben Lindbergh actually writes for The Ringer, one of our favorite websites. They got to run an independent minor league baseball team in California called the Sonoma Stompers, and they got to do it according to like advanced statistics and run the team their way. And I want to listen to the audiobook. So
I want to listen to that too.
to download your free audiobook, go to audibletrial.com/chalkboard, audibletrial.com/chalkboard. I'm going to read something that you wrote. So at the onset of the Royals, the first of the 2 World Series runs, I think. So you wrote a story that I think was pretty, I don't know if famous is the right word, but viral kind of around Kansas City. And that was the Kansas City's lost generation of baseball fans to witness first playoff game, which is cool. Like looking back on it, I had forgotten that it was like one day before that wild card game against the A's, which was exciting. But this paragraph, so you said, if you grew up in Kansas City in the years after the 1985 World Series, you came to know certain things about your city. You knew that the suburbs were a cozy place to grow up and that the Grandview Triangle meant traffic. You knew that downtown was somehow a functioning ghost town. You knew that Derek Thomas was always coming off the edge and Marcus Allen would gain that extra yard, and that, yes, you were wearing your Chiefs jersey to school on Friday. You knew that the Timberwolf at Worlds of Fun was the #1 wooden roller coaster in the world, and that Gates Barbecue was here to help you, and that the plaza would always be alive on a cold winter night. So that story was about like people who were born in the months kind of after the Royals last made the playoffs until they did. And that just strikes me as that's like such a Kansas City thing, because I think I'm a few years younger than you, but those are like all things that Eric and I are
us.
like, yeah, like the Timberwolf, like the Timberwolf.
Well, it had that sign. Do you remember the sign that was like
those outside the
Yeah.
line,
Yeah.
But it was the fastest wooden roller coaster, not the fastest roller coaster. Yeah, just the wooden, fastest wooden one.
All those.
Also, the one roller coaster in the world to give you whiplash guaranteed because it's so shaky.
But you went to high school in Kansas City, like you're kind of from Kansas City. Not that you're like solely a Kansas City writer, but like how do you think you being from Kansas City and kind of growing up with the sports and a sports fan kind of helps you shape the way you write about the Royals?
Yeah, I mean, I think the biggest thing is, I mean, you sort of have an understanding for like the town and the people, but that's like a very cliche thing. I do think like you just sort of have an understanding for the history of the teams and where it becomes like, I don't know if you want to say like institutional knowledge, or like you can write with an authority, or like or write with like a confidence, because like you just feel like you really know not only like the current team, but you know like what's happened, you know, sort of like the arc and the narrative of like the franchises. And so I think it just becomes like, I think it's good to have experienced all that, because it gives you sort of an emotional like connection or like edge that like I think comes out in writing, where like people can tell, like, not that people have to be from somewhere to write about a certain team or a certain town. Like I think sometimes that like sort of like outsider's perspective is also beneficial, but it just like I feel like it offers sort of like a perspective where people feel like they sort of like are coming from the same point of view or the same place, and I think it's helpful.
Not that you want to like pander to that either,
Yeah.
right? Or be like, I'm the kids, because I know like, especially I think sometimes with like maybe like more like columnists, I know like Boston is like a crazy like sports media town.
Like a
They're like,
homer
we're
town.
from like a homer town kind
Yeah.
of thing, where it's like, well, I'm from this city, or I know it. So you don't like want to pander that. But I think especially, I mean, that was those 2 years that the Royals were in the World Series were such like a unique thing for the city. Like, it's all I think
for sure. And I think like Boston's a bigger town, obviously, but it's very much in the same way is like a lot of most like they have a lot of transplants too. Don't get me wrong, but like Boston's a very parochial town where like people stay in Boston, and I think Kansas City is similar in that regard, and most cities of the same size are similar. And I feel like those are like the best. Honestly, those are like the best sports towns to work in, or to write about, because you know, for whatever, like, if you want to like knock certain cities for like, all right, everybody's just from here and they never leave, and like all this sort of like negative stereotypes about certain places, like for whatever you say about that, like it does create like a culture of that like is unique, especially around the sports teams. And so like people like I know people who work in like LA or like Phoenix or even like trying to think of other good examples, but like where people just don't really like there's a lot of people that care about the local sports obviously, but it's just like a much different environment. Like this is a very bad sounds a very like a little self-indulgent, but like the people that cover like sports in Kansas City, if you look at their like Twitter follower numbers, they're like much higher than like even like people who cover sports in like really big markets. And maybe that's because there's less reporters here, but I think it's also just because people are much more invested in like what's going on in Kansas City than they are in a lot of like big places. So it is just like it makes it like a fun place to work and to like write about sports.
Do you just want to kind of give us the pitch a little bit, because it's a newer sports venture and we're excited to hear about it?
Sure. So I always feel like I'm sort of like selling people on this because it is subscription based. But I'll just give you kind of like the brief history of like the company. And so The Athletic was founded in 2016, and it's based out of the Bay Area by these two guys who are kind of in their early 30s that grew up loving sports and reading sports and felt like that, you know, like sports fans were not being served correctly, and that there was sort of a market for like local sports content that was sort of geared towards like younger, more like analytical, more like people that really valued like premium content. And so they initially started in Chicago. That was like the first local site, and they have since spread. Well, now they're all over, but then they also went to Toronto, Cleveland, the Bay Area. Those were sort of the first markets that they tapped into, and the idea was to provide sort of local sports content for a small subscription fee, but there's like no ads on the website. There's no pop-ups. There's no like Google surveys. There's like none of the things that make it like annoying to like read stuff on the internet or to click on a link on Twitter that you don't know where it's taking you. It's just like very like easy and seamless reading experience. So that was sort of the model. And then they have since now expanded into now covering like sports on a more national level. They have like a college basketball vertical. They have a college football vertical. They have, I think, maybe the best baseball writer in the country, Ken Rosenthal, who's now is like their national baseball writer. And then they put together kind of a national team of people to cover Major League Baseball. And so I joined that team a few weeks ago on, I think March 5th was my first day. So they have like big plans for Kansas City though. They're essentially, when they go into a market, they, you know, like they want to cover the teams that are in that market. So they're going to cover the Chiefs. They'll cover the local colleges. They'll cover Sporting Kansas City to some degree. And essentially like their bet is that one, that people like are not being served totally well by the experience of reading online, you know, and also that, you know, that the story, like the stories that matter to people are the stories that you remember, right? Like the little anecdotes about a player, like the personal stories, the human interest stuff, like the really interesting stuff. And so they're very focused on that. And also like this is more from like a journalism or an online like publishing perspective, but like, you know, the online like ecosystem over the last decade or more is basically, for a long time, it's basically been, okay, we have to chase clicks, right? Like we like not to single out BuzzFeed or other places like that, but it was like, all right, we need to chase clicks because we need to drive online advertising. We need to have like banner ads. We need to have like other stuff like that. And that's how we're going to make our money. Like that's how journalism is going to be saved in the future, because the print product, whether it's newspapers, magazines, whatever, that's going to go away at some point. And that online advertising was going to be like, whether it was video or banner or whatever, like that was going to be the fix. And it's essentially been proven, and I'm not like a super expert on the subject, but whether it's Facebook or Google, like they get all the money. Like they own the internet. Like that's where all the online advertising goes. And so publishers, whether it's newspapers, magazines, on like just online websites, like have had a very difficult time, finding their way and finding ways to be profitable. And I think that, not to make it like too dire of an analogy, but I think that's like where we are in a culture is like kind of connected to that. Whereas like right now, like media appeals to what gets the most clicks, and it's a very consumer driven industry, but that's not always the best way to be delivering people the news or like information. So yeah, The Athletic is essentially saying it doesn't matter how many people read a story. We obviously want people to read a story, but we want people to be invested in the product and feel like they're paying for something that is worth it. And very much like, in the way that, 10, 15 years ago, I guess I probably bought some songs on like iTunes and stuff, but I didn't think of myself as like, why would I ever pay for music online? Like a lot of it, just like doesn't like, but then Spotify came along and it was like $10 a month to like get every song you've ever heard. And yeah, you're not going to listen to all those songs, but you can find whatever you want. Plus, you can get the other stuff if you want it. And not saying The Athletic is going to be the Spotify of like online sports journalism, but it's very much in the same mold where it's like if you offer people premium content that they feel like they have to be a part of, then yeah, paying $4 a month, for that content is worth it. And so that's kind of like the bet they're making as a company. And yeah, I'm kind of excited to see where it goes because like I don't know what the future of journalism is. I'm like not that smart, but like I do kind of feel like if like these newspapers and other news outlets are going to survive, it's going to be a model that's much more like subscription based than anything else.
Yeah, I mean, it's HBO. HBO
Yeah.
came out with quality content, and then everyone demanded that, like, hey, I don't want to have cable, but I want HBO. And so then people were willing to pay the HBO Go price, and they built that whole platform around it. So it seems like, why wouldn't journalism go in the same direction?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes people, like, especially now, Royals fans will say, like, why would I pay for Royals content online? Like, the Star has a paywall, but all of their content is free if you go through social media, whether it's Facebook or Twitter. And it's like, why would I pay for something? And it's like, well, like you're paying for it in other ways. You're paying for it by a bad reading experience. You're paying for it by annoying pop-up ads clicking. And like the New York Times and the Washington Post, like they have softer paywalls, but like you run into those pretty quickly these days. Like most news outlets I think, in my opinion, will be behind a paywall, like for them, like almost all, and then within like 10 to 15 years. I could be proven wrong. Maybe something else will come along and like save the industry that way. But I do feel like the future of the internet, for better or for worse, is people paying for content that they like.
Yeah. How do you, and I don't know if you have an answer for this or if anyone has an answer, but how do you get people around just being pissed that they have to like pay for something like the paywall? Like how do you get people to buy into that?
Yeah. Well, I mean, I hope that like you're giving them something that where you feel like, hey, this is worth it. I mean, it's like, I think about it this way, like for the cost of basically like a latte, like a medium latte is like how much it costs to subscribe to The Athletic per month. Mm-hmm. And so I don't know, maybe that's a terrible analogy. I've heard like some other people use other ones, but it really does seem like it's not that much money, but also it's like if you don't like the product and if you don't feel like it's valuable, then don't pay for it. That's just like
exactly.
It's like that's sort of obvious, but it's like if you like what you're reading and you want it to be there, then pay for it, because no matter whether it's The Athletic, whether it's Sports Illustrated, whether it's like the New York Times, The Economist, like whatever it is, like if you want that stuff to be there and you find value in it, then like find a way to support it. It's very much like, whether it's music or whatever the like other things you want to talk about. It's like
podcasting.
Yeah, like support the stuff that like you like.
Yeah.
And I feel like that maybe like our generation will be a little bit more open to that, especially online, like moving forward. But I don't know. We'll see.
Not that I like need to tell you why I think The Athletic is going to work or like will work.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think the local like the local aspect draws me to it, as well as just I think did a smart thing by like bringing in like really talented people. 'Cause, there's other sites that like SB Nation, like that kind of like trend local, where I don't know. I just think the Athletic kind of bringing in some of those like big hitters, like when I saw like Ken Rosenthal was like coming to the Athletic, it's like, whoa, that's like a real legit thing. I actually started subscribing when Derek Bodner started covering the Sixers stuff and like went to the Athletic, and it was like he was just writing good stuff about a super interesting basketball team. But now I think the fact that there's a Kansas City people, a lot of people in Kansas City are just Kansas City sports fans, but a lot of people in Kansas City are really big Kansas City sports fans, but would be super interested in reading about a lot of other stories in sports.
For sure. And I think like there are a lot of sports fans in Kansas City, obviously, but there are also a lot of Kansas City sports fans that live other places.
Yeah.
And so the Athletic is also sort of trying to appeal to out-of-market sports fans who they really want to follow the Chiefs and the Royals, but they don't necessarily, have any sort of need to be following like the local goings-on in Kansas City, which it's like you should subscribe to the Star too. Like you should like if you feel like if you want like government oversight and like all those sort of things, like if you believe in that stuff, please subscribe to the local newspaper. I'm not telling you not to, but like if you are living in like New York or LA or Seattle or Dallas or wherever, and it's a very easy way to like keep up with your teams that in a different way, like a different bundle.
Yeah. Let's talk about a couple of the things you've written for the Athletic so far. I think most interesting, we talked about this a little bit off air. I asked you since March 5th, since you started, like what was the most interesting thing that you had to write, which was obviously the article titled Inside the Royals Anti-Porn Campaign. So
yes.
Can you talk a little bit about that? I know it's behind a paywall, but let's talk about these things.
Sure. So, this actually is a kind of a funny story, and I could probably talk for like 20 minutes about this. So last year, Danny Duffy got a DUI in like late August. And so the next day, actually I think it was 2 days later, they had a press conference at Kauffman Stadium with Danny Duffy and the Royals general manager Dayton Moore, and essentially to address the situation and kind of just diffuse it. And so Danny offered like a 2 or 3 minute statement. He couldn't say much because of the legal matter, but then so he left, and then Dayton Moore sort of had a long press conference, and because he is a very accountable and stand-up guy, I think it lasted for like 30 minutes. And at one point in the press conference, there was a reporter there from Yahoo Sports who's actually based out of Kansas City, Jeff Passan, who's like a very prominent baseball writer. And so he asked a question about the educational things that the Royals have in place about like driving under the influence or other like off-field like issues. And Dayton Moore said, he's like, we focus on all sorts of things. And sort of out of nowhere, he's mentioned, we even educate players on porn. And it kind of was like, wait, whoa, like I didn't expect him to say that.
Took a turn.
So anyway, fast forward like a few months, like there was an anti-porn organization called Fight the New Drug. I think they're based out of like Salt Lake City, kind of on brand if you think about it.
Yeah, very true.
They're just outside of the Jazz Arena.
Yeah. So they had contacted the Royals. And we're like, we heard what you said. We're really like, we want to work with you guys. So the Royals, long story short, invited them to spring training to address all their minor league players and to educate them on the information, like on the ills of pornography and what it can do to the mind and all this stuff. And I guess I kind of want to be a little bit careful how about like I say this since I cover the team, but like people can have whatever judgments they want about like whether or not that's like a useful time, like a good use of time for a Major League Baseball team. It certainly got a lot of people talking, and like a lot of people thinking about it. And the organization has been accused of like misrepresenting science, and I guess we don't really need to get in a debate about like pornography. Although I did see that there was actually a New York Times editorial recently from one of their conservative columnists who advocated banning porn. So I guess it's not like too far out of the mainstream for like this view, but
Yeah.
I didn't think we were going to talk about this for this long. But it is like it's an interesting subject. So anyway, so I wrote a story about like I talked to Dayton Moore, kind of just like getting his thoughts on why this is like a thing that he cares about, and he was very honest and kind of explained kind of like where he was coming from and why it's important for like young baseball players to like know this and how it could affect their performance. And so I wrote a story about that. But yeah, check it out. It's interesting. It's very interesting stuff.
Yeah. It's got to be interesting when things like that, because I think a lot of the things you write, are probably just, they're pretty either like localized stuff or, people who are just baseball fans would check out, like, oh, the Royals signed Clay Buchholz. That's really interesting. Like, I remember when that guy had long hair, was on the Red Sox. Like, what happened to that guy? But then when things kind of get the national attention, it's got to be interesting. The story you dropped today, which is Monday, March 26th.
That's the one.
That I really enjoyed is called Ned Yost's Future May Be Uncertain, but his Netflix queue is all lined up, which I really enjoyed reading. How'd you like get the idea for this story? Like, how'd you hear that?
Well, so like I've covered Ned now for 2 seasons. This is my 3rd. And so we've talked a lot about television. And like I interview him every day for like 5 or 10 minutes with a couple other beat writers. And so a lot of times when there's not a lot going on, you end up just shooting the breeze for a few minutes. And so he's been into like, he watched Breaking Bad like years ago. He watched The West Wing like twice. And so like
He's a man after Micah's own heart.
Yeah, like so what he does is he doesn't watch a lot of TV, but like he got into it because he walks on the treadmill every morning for like an hour. And he just was kind of like bored walking on the treadmill. So he has like an iPad that he's very into. So he just got like a Netflix subscription, and then he just started diving into like television shows and just like sort of like went like full like prestige TV,
It's incredible.
Like, so he's watched like Sons of Anarchy. He's watched like The Walking Dead. He watched Narcos last year. So like I talked to him about this like a bunch, and I was just like, I always thought like this would be kind of a fun story to do at some point. And then like I talked to him a little bit more about it this spring, and he got hurt in the off season. He like fell out of a tree stand.
That was just nuts.
So he was not watching as much Netflix this year. But like, I don't know. It's very interesting. Like Ned is a more interesting guy than people think. Like he has very eclectic tastes. Like he was watching the David Letterman show.
Yeah, that was the one.
And he was like, start with the Obama episode. It was great. You
Yeah.
know, like, and then like the George Clooney one was fantastic. And there was one day that like, one time we were discussing like Daniel Day-Lewis's career. And like, he really likes Lincoln. He's watched it like 5 times.
This is just unbelievable.
But he also, there was another.
He's watched Lincoln multiple times.
He says he just loves Daniel Day-Lewis's portrayal of Lincoln so much that he's watched it like multiple times.
It's like a 3-hour hang.
I love like Civil War history and Daniel Day-Lewis, but Lincoln, that's a tough watch multiple times.
But he has like, there would be like random movies that will come up like one time he was like, yeah, like we were like, Ned, what'd you do last night? I don't know if it was an off day, it doesn't really matter, but he was like, must have been a night off, and he was like, it's like I went home and I watched Do the Right Thing, the Spike Lee movie, and he's like, yeah, the Spike Lee, and like we're like, whoa, he's like, it's a great movie. And I was just like, it's like the last movie that you think Ned Yost is going to be into is like Spike Lee's Do the Right Thing. But no, he has a very eclectic taste. So like I tried to capture that in the story, and and I actually am like the last person who should be writing this story because I like don't watch much TV. I've never seen Breaking Bad. I've never seen The Wire. It's like kind of like my most embarrassing like characteristic.
You love Simmons and you haven't seen The Wire.
No.
Oh man.
Wow, that ruined my next question because I was going to ask you what like TV show do you have in common with Ned Yost, but I guess there's none.
Moving on.
Okay, so kind of wrapping things up here. So in kind of your announcement piece for the Athletic, you referenced a perennial Joe Posnanski piece that you would always read. The Royals were going to make the playoffs, he wrote, and here was how they'd do it. So how are they going to do it this year?
Well, they probably won't, but in the interest of being optimistic, they had some additions to the team during spring training. They re-signed Mike Moustakas at a very cheap, club-friendly rate that was very unexpected. They signed Lucas Duda, who like if you want to be very optimistic, like if you were super baseball nerdy, like he actually has been like a more valuable player than Eric Hosmer over the last 4 seasons. And Eric Hosmer got 144 million and Lucas Duda got 3.5. It's funny
That's
how
insane.
it's funny how baseball works. They signed John Jay, who will be playing center field or maybe one of the corner outfield spots. But really, like, if you were a Royals fan and you want a reason to hope, the Royals play in a very bad division. The Chicago White Sox are rebuilding. They're a little bit ahead of where the Royals are, at least in terms of having good young players. But the Detroit Tigers are also rebuilding, and they're going to be really bad. And the Twins are supposed to be improved, and the Indians will be very good. But, like, there is, like, a path, and it's probably, like, a 1 in, like, 20 shot that where they are, like, the Royals are hanging around 500 just because there are so many other bad teams that they end up just randomly winning a lot of games. And they have some good pitching and, you know, some okay position players and all that, like, baseball stuff. But there is, like, a scenario where they're, like, hanging around 500 at the All-Star break. And, like, so they're not totally out of it. And they have a chance for, like, the second wild card or something in the American League. So that's kind of the optimistic viewpoint. But who knows? You know, like, baseball is very random. There's always, like, at least one team that is much better than people expect. So who knows? Maybe it could be the Royals.
What are your feelings entering the season? Like, how do you just spent, you said 6 weeks in Arizona. Like, what this episode I think is going to post the day before opening day. Like, what's your general vibe like right before a season starts?
Yeah, well, like, so the Royals just are like, I'm trying to think, like, put this in a good way. Like, they just have lots of question marks. Like, their bullpen is very bad, and bad is not, like, it's very unproven. They have Kelvin Herrera, who's not great last year in the closer role, but beyond him, they don't really have anybody else. And they're, like, a team that was, like, built on, like, having these, like, super bullpens. And they don't quite have that anymore. Their starting rotation could be good. Like, Danny Duffy could be very good. They need Ian Kennedy and Jason Hamill to be much better than they were last year. And then their other 2 pitchers, Nate Carnes and Jake Junis, like, could also be, like, okay. So actually I think Carnes could be one of their better pitchers, actually. So, like, they have some upside in their starting rotation. Their offense probably won't be that good. Like, at the moment, they still have Alex Gordon and Alcides Escobar hitting, like, every day. But, like, they still have Mike Moustakas, and Lucas Duda could be decent, and Jorge Soler could be much improved, and they have Whit Merrifield had a great year last year. He could be really good again. So, like, they have enough pieces to where they could, like, win some games. But, like, they probably have too many flaws and too many, like, they probably just don't really have the pitching to be consistently good. So, yeah, I think their ceiling is, like, right around that 500 mark. But, like, in baseball terms, there are so many games, and, like, the variance is so, like when you think of it in these terms, like, a team can win 80, they could go 81-81 and they finish, 10 games out of the playoffs, or let's say they finish, like, 7 or 8 games out of the playoffs. It's like, well, what is, like, 7 or 8 games over a 162 game season? This is essentially, like, one more win every, like, week and a half, or maybe even, like, 2 weeks. And so, like, you can, like, the difference between an 80-win team and a 90-win team, like, seems like a lot, because, like, one team you see is like, oh, that team's very good, and that team looks not so good. But, like the difference over the course of a season is really, like, it's more minimal than you think. So teams can, like, that's why teams can have, like, they can outperform their, like, if you want to get really baseball nerdy, so there's this thing called the Pythagorean win theorem. It's essentially, like, how many runs a baseball team scores over the course of a season versus how many runs they give up. And, like, so, like, there's a formula that dictates, like, how many total runs they have and how many total runs they gave up. You should basically know how many games that team, like, is going to win.
Oh, wow.
Yet, like, teams can, like, outperform their Pythag, as they call it, by just, like, winning lots of close games, getting very lucky, like, being a little streaky, winning games that they shouldn't win. And so, like, yeah, at the end of the season, a team could win, like, 10 or 12 more games than they really should. And so there's always teams like that. So if you want to, like, really hope about the Royals, who knows? Maybe they could be that team.
Accidents can happen.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, Rustin, thanks for joining us. We're excited
Thank you so much, man.
About what you're going to do for the Athletic in Kansas City.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
Hey, we appreciate you listening to our conversation with Rustin Dodd. He was a great guy to hang out with and talk sports and sports writing with. You can follow him on Twitter and Instagram at Rustin Dodd, and you should also follow at The Athletic KC because there's going to be more Kansas City content coming. Go to theathletic.com and subscribe for a free trial, or just go ahead and purchase one subscription because you know it's going to be good. Like Rustin said on the podcast, it's about the price of a latte a month, and there's great sports writing on there. A guy really like Richard Deitch went over to The Athletic and is writing about sports media. And if you're a Royals fan, sign up, get that Royals content. Rustin's going to be bringing you guys good stories every single week.
We did it. We're excited about The Athletic.
Yeah.
We're all in over here at the Chalkboard. Look, we really appreciate you all listening this week and every week. If you want more of the Chalkboard podcast, make sure to check us out on Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram, and also visit our website, chalkboardpodcast.com. If you're a regular listener or just loved what you heard, make sure to rate, share, and subscribe to this podcast wherever you listen. Our theme song is Killers, which is written and performed by Salar Rajebnik, and you can get his music on Apple Music, Spotify, really wherever you download music. That's it for us this week. We'll see you next time. Go Royals.